Let's take a look at how we can use a control called a GridSplitter to resize the rows and columns of a grid at runtime, building a flexible UI. So just in a simple way, I've got two projects here. I've got the Silverlight project and the web project. Into my main page.xaml, what I've done is created a grid. That grid has two columns in it which are equally sized, and into those columns I've placed a red rectangle and a blue rectangle. And the idea is to end up with a piece of UI that allows us to resize this at runtime. So what we'll do is we'll add into the project a GridSplitter control. Now in order to do this you need to bring in a different XAML namespace. So I'm just going to go ahead and say XML&S. Let's call this GridSplitter GS equals. Now we scroll down to system.windows.controls. I have to try and guess which of the right ones this is. Let's try that one. Okay, in system.windowscontrols.extended, that's where the GridSplitter lives. So we've given that GS, and now we can go ahead and say GS::GridSplitter. And the question is where we want to put this thing. So let's tell it to be in grid.column equals 1. Let's tell it that vertically what we want it to do is stretch itself, and horizontally what we want it to do is align to the left. Let's just see if we can go and run the project with that in place. Let's just enable debugging. Let's spin up IE. And you should be able to see straight away that we get this resizable UI. The blue rectangle is stretching to fit, the red rectangle is stretching to fit. So it's a very simple thing to just get this kind of UI that just resizes this way. Let's close that down. Let's pop back to the XAML. Now what if we had a more complex layout? What if we had some rows up here as well? So let's have some row definitions, and in there let's have a row definition and another row definition. And I guess now we have to decide what to do with those bottom cells of the grid. So let's take another couple of rectangles. Let's have one which is yellow, and we'll put that into grid column 0 but row 1. Move that down there, and then let's finally have one other rectangle which we'll make green. I'll put that into column 1. And now we've got a layout that way. Now notice what's happened with our layout. If we press F5 at the moment, let's have a look at what our GridSplitter is actually doing. Our GridSplitter is only splitting, and it's only visible across that top cell. It looks a little bit weird. So let's go and fix that. We'll tell our GridSplitter that what we need it to do is have a grid.row span, a row span of 2, and then it will fill the whole thing. And let's go and put another GridSplitter in here. Let's have a horizontal one. So we'll say that what we want it to do vertically is align to the top, and what we want it to do horizontally is to stretch. And we'll put this into grid row of 1, and we'll give it a column span of 2. So effectively we just created a GridSplitter that goes across, and if we press F5 we've now got the layout that allows us to do. Let's just get that onto the screen. We can now size this way, and we can size this way, and we've built something reasonably flexible. And you can probably see how you can really go to your heart's content in terms of using these things in order to resize layout. And of course, if you've got grids within here, you can do all kinds of fancy dynamic layout operations as these various cells are being resized within the main grid that we've got there. So just a very simple thing to know about. We have this built-in control called the GridSplitter. It's in that extended assembly, so by default you won't see it unless you bring that assembly in. And it's pretty simple to use. Just tell it which columns and rows to go into, how to align itself, and it works quite naturally.